fear, no doubt, trust in the Lord. Cut away, make your heart restore. Heavy load we carry along, but His light go make us strong. No more running, no disguise. Circumcise your heart, arise. No be strength, no be might. Nice hand, they show the light. Step by step, we hold on tight. Faith go guide us through the night. No wahala, we go there. No fear, no shaker. Faith will guide us through the night. Your time is santan. Bine chutak over the night. Bine chinte bebe vision. Tap toke meet this rent. No more money, no vision. Keep on a cocaine and qua. No more manji reptila. Keep show near the man. My bedroom. Oh, Vibekele. No fear, no doubt, trust in the Lord. Cut away, make your heart restore. Heavy load we carry along, but His light go make us strong. No more running, no disguise. Circumcise your heart, arise. No be strength, no be might. Nice hand, they show the light. Step by step, we hold on tight. Faith go guide us through the night. No wahala, we go there. No fear, no shake.
What if race isn't real? What if it was never about biology, but about power? How did the world come to believe in a hierarchy that didn't exist? Humans have a conscience. Deep down, people know the difference between right and wrong. But when oppression becomes the foundation of a society, the mind has only two choices: justify it or fight against it. The invention of race was a response to this moral contradiction. A system designed not only to control people, but to control how they thought, how they saw themselves, and how they saw others. It was a tool of power, disguised as reality. For most of history, power was about class. Kings ruled over peasants. The rich exploited the poor. And while there was injustice, there was no racial caste, until colonialism changed everything. In the 1500s, European nations expanded across the globe. They encountered new peoples, indigenous, African, Asian. But how could they justify conquest, enslavement, and exploitation? The answer: they invented a hierarchy. The Spanish and Portuguese created the caste system, ranking people by their mix of European, indigenous, and African ancestry. The British took a simpler approach, a strict division: white and free, black and enslaved. But in early colonial America, race wasn't yet fully established. White and black laborers worked together. Sometimes they even rebelled together. That was the problem. In 1676, Bacon's rebellion shook the Virginia colony. Poor whites and enslaved Africans united against the ruling elite, and the elite saw the danger: unity among the oppressed. Their solution: divide them. Colonial leaders passed a series of laws over time to grant small privileges to poor whites while stripping rights from black people. The legal construction of race was not immediate. It was a deliberate, step-by-step process. In 1662, Virginia passed the Partus Sequitur Ventrum law, making slavery hereditary. By 1680, black people, whether free or enslaved, were banned from carrying arms. In 1691, interracial marriage was outlawed to reinforce racial separation. By 1705, the Virginia Slave Act officially codified racial hierarchy, ensuring that white people, no matter how poor, had rights that black people never could. This wasn't limited to Virginia. Maryland followed with laws banning interracial marriage and forbidding free black people from testifying against whites in court. South Carolina's Negro Act of 1740 made it illegal for black people to learn to read or assemble in groups. In North Carolina, an enslaved person who escaped for over a year could be executed. These laws were designed to make race a permanent barrier, ensuring that the poor saw themselves as white first and not as part of a shared oppressed class. Colonial leaders passed laws granting privileges to poor whites: land, the right to own firearms, and most importantly, the power to police black bodies. In contrast, black people were stripped of all rights. The message was clear: no matter how poor, if you were white, you were superior. Whiteness wasn't just a skin color, it was a social status. an identity created to keep the lower classes from uniting, and it worked. But making race real required more than laws. It needed belief. For whiteness to survive, people had to believe in it. Poor whites, who had little wealth or power, were given a psychological wage, a sense of superiority over black people. This kept them loyal to the system, even when it worked against their own interests. Meanwhile, for the enslaved, race became an inescapable mark of oppression. Resistance was met with violence, while laws made it nearly impossible to escape bondage. The system was designed to keep everyone in their place. Even after slavery ended, the logic of race remained. Segregation, redlining, and mass incarceration ensured that the racial caste system endured. But if race was invented, it can also be dismantled. The truth is, the human mind can be conditioned to believe in false hierarchies, but it can also unlearn them. Race was never about biology, it was about power. And power can only hold when people believe in its legitimacy. Today, we have the knowledge to challenge these falsehoods, to rewrite the narrative and build a world based on truth. What happens when a civilization gains the power to dominate the world, but loses its soul in the process? The age of exploration was more than discovery. It was conquest, enslavement, and genocide on a scale never seen before. But conquest alone was not enough. Something darker emerged, a justification, a doctrine, a beast. Before European expansion, human societies were divided by class, culture, and empire, not by race. But as Europe expanded, as its power grew, so did its hunger. And to feed that hunger, a new ideology was needed, one that would excuse the destruction of entire civilizations. And so, scientific racism was born. This was no accident. This was engineered. And it was not just about control. It was about reshaping the very psyche of a people. In 1735, Swedish scientist Carl Linnaeus divided humanity into racial categories: the European, smart and civilized; the African, lazy and savage. This was no discovery. This was propaganda. Then came Johann Friedrich Blumenbach in 1775. He coined the term Caucasian, not as a neutral descriptor, but as an ideal, a fabricated hierarchy where whiteness was placed at the pinnacle of human beauty and intelligence. But beneath the surface, the term Caucasian carried an even more insidious agenda. In doing so, they redefined ancient history, claiming that the peoples of the Bible, Egyptians, Cushites, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites, were actually white, and that they had colonized Africa rather than originating from it. This distortion served a dual purpose. It solidified the racial hierarchy by associating whiteness with divine origin, while relegating black Africans to a pre-Adamic, subhuman status, beings outside the lineage of God's chosen creation. In this worldview, black people were no longer even part of human history. They became an aberration, an other that existed solely for subjugation. And then Samuel George Morton. In the 1800s, he measured skulls, claiming that the size of a person's brain determined their intelligence. His conclusion: Europeans were the smartest, Africans the least. But what he did not reveal was that his results were manipulated. The data was rigged. This was not science. This was a system, a machine built to justify oppression. But something else was happening. The people at the top of the racial hierarchy, Europeans, particularly the ruling classes, were not just enforcing this system, they were internalizing it. As science, social theory, and industrial progress advanced, so did the belief in their own inherent superiority. One of the greatest crimes of scientific racism was not just the subjugation of black people, but the deliberate erasure of their history. If the world could be convinced that Africa contributed nothing to civilization, then the enslavement of its people could be justified as a civilizing mission rather than an atrocity. Europeans did not just distort history, they rewrote it. They claimed Egypt was a white civilization. They ignored the great empires of Mali, Songhai, and Kush. They downplayed the architectural genius of Great Zimbabwe. They suppressed the fact that advanced mathematics, astronomy, and engineering flourished in Africa long before Europe's Renaissance. This lie was essential. If Africans were seen as builders of great civilizations, then how could they be inferior? How could they be slaves? The truth had to be buried. And so, libraries of African knowledge were destroyed. Artifacts were stolen. Histories were rewritten to make it seem as if Africa had always been primitive, always waiting for European enlightenment. And who took their place? The Caucasian identity was expanded to absorb black history. Suddenly, biblical peoples, pharaohs, and even the Moors were recast as white. This was more than cultural theft. It was a complete rewriting of human history, engineered to justify domination. Many of these ideas are deeply embedded in Western culture, often accepted without question, while most are unaware of their origins and ties to the philosophy of white supremacy. Others embrace them with full awareness. For centuries, European society was bound by religious doctrine. The church was the arbiter of morality, and human worth was seen as tied to divine creation. But with the Enlightenment, a new faith emerged, not in God, but in science. The rise of secular thought, the push away from religious explanations, and the dominance of empirical reasoning changed how Europeans viewed the world. Science was now the ultimate authority, and when the question of human difference arose, science was used not to unite, but to divide. Darwin's theory of evolution was groundbreaking, but its misuse became catastrophic. His ideas of natural selection were twisted into survival of the fittest by thinkers like Herbert Spencer. What began as a theory of adaptation became a justification for human hierarchy. It was no longer God who ordained superiority. It was nature itself. The moral restraint of religion weakened, and in its place, a cold, calculating logic emerged. If one race was more advanced, then it was natural for others to perish. Colonial expansion, enslavement, and genocide were no longer sins. They were progress. If one race was superior, then logically, others were unfit. This became the core idea of eugenics, championed by figures like Francis Galton, Charles Davenport, and Madison Grant. Governments listened. In the United States, sterilization laws were passed. Black, indigenous, and poor white women were forcibly sterilized to improve the human race. And then came Nazi Germany. The architects of the Holocaust did not invent racial purity laws. They borrowed them from America, citing the works of American eugenicists to justify their policies. This was no accident. This was engineered. No people in history had ever taken control of the entire world. And when it happened, it was not by a force of enlightenment or benevolence. It was by a beast, a culture that devoured everything in its path, justifying conquest with deception, violence, and the erasure of entire civilizations. This was the devil's bargain. As it is written, "For what shall it profit a man, if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?"